The attic box. Ellie and Jake had spent most of the afternoon sorting through the dusty remnants of his late grandmother's attic. Old photos, broken lamps, and yellowed letters lay scattered around, each one a piece of a life long forgotten. The attic smelled of aged wood and mildew, the single light bulb flickering as they worked. Jake's grandmother had always been a mysterious figure in his life, distant, but with a strange presence that made people feel uncomfortable. When she passed, her house became Jake's responsibility, including clearing out her belongings. It was tedious work, but then Ellie found it, a small, intricately carved wooden box, hidden beneath a stack of old quilts. "Jake, look at this," she said, holding up the box. It was unlike anything else in the attic, polished, with detailed carvings of twisted faces and strange symbols covering its surface. There was no key, but the latch seemed loose. "Whoa, that looks old." "Probably worth something," Jake said, barely glancing over as he continued sifting through papers. Ellie sat down, intrigued. "Should we open it?" Jake shrugged. "Go for it." With a small click, the latch released, and Ellie slowly lifted the lid. Inside, there was nothing but a small, crumpled piece of parchment. Disappointed but curious, she unfolded it. The paper was stained and fragile, but the words written on it were clear, though unfamiliar. "She watches from the shadows, waiting. A bond once sealed cannot be broken. Beware the mirror, for it is her doorway." Ellie's pulse quickened. "What do you think this means?" she asked, but when she looked up, Jake was no longer paying attention. He had his back to her, digging through a trunk in the corner of the attic. Annoyed, Ellie glanced back at the box. She almost wanted to throw it away, but something told her not to. The carved faces on the box seemed to leer at her now, mocking her curiosity. She looked away, her eyes drawn to the far end of the attic, where an old standing mirror caught her attention. The mirror hadn't been there before. At least, she was sure it hadn't. "Jake," she whispered, suddenly feeling cold, her breath visible in the air. He didn't respond. Ellie stood up, slowly walking toward the mirror, her footsteps muffled by the old wooden floor. As she neared it, the air seemed to thicken, as though the room was closing in around her. Her reflection looked back at her, but something was off. The reflection was smiling. She stopped in her tracks, heart racing. She wasn't smiling. Before she could react, the reflection moved, tilting its head slightly to the side, studying her. Ellie froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Jake." She called again, but this time, her voice came out as a strained whisper. Her reflection's grin widened, its eyes darkening into deep, hollow voids. Then it spoke. "Come closer, Ellie." Her own voice echoed from the reflection, but it wasn't her. It was something else, something pretending to be her. She stumbled back, her body trembling with fear, but her reflection stayed in place, still grinning, still waiting. Suddenly, Jake turned, his face pale. "Ellie?" he called, his voice sounding far away, as though the attic had expanded, stretching the space between them. Ellie turned to run, but the mirror's surface rippled like water. Her reflection reached out, a hand made of shadows and cold mist, grasping her wrist. She gasped, unable to pull away as the reflection yanked her toward the glass. The mirror's surface shimmered, pulling her in, the world behind her growing dimmer with each passing second. Jake's voice was fading, distant and unreachable, as Ellie's body was swallowed by the mirror. The attic was silent once more. Jake turned around, but Ellie was gone. The mirror stood untouched, its surface smooth and still, as though nothing had ever happened. But from the shadows, a soft voice whispered her name. And the box sat quietly on the floor, its carvings glowing faintly in the dim light, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to open it.